The wind carried dust like ash across the plains, turning the horizon into a shifting haze. Daniel Harper, a rancher with more years carved into his face than he liked to admit, had spent the day mending a fence that refused to stand straight. By the time dusk came, he was bone-tired, boots heavy with mud and his shirt clinging with sweat. All he wanted was to collapse inside his quiet cabin, eat what little supper he had left, and let silence carry him into sleep. But silence didn't come. It was the cry that reached him first, faint, brittle, almost swallowed by the moan of the wind. Daniel froze, hand hovering near the rifle slung by the door. In these lands, a sound like that could mean anything. A coyote caught in a trap, a trick of the wind, or worse, some trap laid by desperate men. He waited, holding his breath. Then it came again, a soft whimper, human. Daniel stepped out into the fading light. His boots sank into the dirt, and his eyes searched the distance. That's when he saw her. She staggered from the line of mesquite trees at the edge of his land, a woman, bent forward like the weight of the world was dragging her down. Her hair was tangled with dust, her dress torn, and in her arms she carried something pressed close to her chest. For a moment, Daniel thought it was a bundle of rags. Then it shifted. A child. His grip tightened on the rifle. Out here, you didn't survive by being trusting. The borderlands between settlers and the tribes were painted in blood, suspicion etched into every glance. To take in someone you didn't know, especially someone native, was to invite danger onto your doorstep. Still, the woman collapsed just yards from his porch, her knees buckling under her. The child whimpered weakly, its tiny hand clutching at her torn sleeve. Daniel cursed under his breath. His ranch was not a place for visitors, much less ones carrying storms behind them. But something in the way the woman clung to the child, something in the hollow desperation of her eyes, rooted him to the spot. He lowered the rifle. By the time he reached her, she was half conscious, lips cracked from thirst. The child, a little girl no older than 6, maybe 7, trembled against her. Daniel bent down and lifted the woman with a grunt. She weighed less than a sack of feed, her body starved by hunger and exhaustion. He carried her into the cabin and set her down on his bed, then turned to the girl. The child didn't speak, didn't flinch, just stared at him with wide, dark eyes that seemed older than they should have been. Daniel set a cup of water into her hands. She drank in quick gulps, spilling most of it down her chin. He refilled the cup and gave it to the woman, whose trembling fingers barely managed to hold it. Inside that small cabin, the air turned heavy. Daniel studied them both under the dim light of his oil lamp. The woman wore beads sewn into the edges of her dress, though most had broken loose. Her skin bore the marks of travel cuts, bruises, and old scars hidden beneath the dust. This was no wanderer who had simply lost her way. She had run, and whatever she had run from would not be far behind. "Where are you from?" Daniel asked finally, his voice low, cautious. The woman's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she pressed the girl closer to her side and closed her eyes. Daniel frowned. He didn't push. He wasn't sure why he hadn't already sent them back into the night. Maybe it was the memory of his own wife, gone these many years, her last breaths filling this very room. Or maybe it was the echo of a different time, when he had been a father once too. Whatever the reason, he found himself ladling stew into bowls and setting them in front of the strangers. The woman tried to eat, but could barely keep it down. The child, however, devoured every bite like a starving wolf. Daniel watched in silence, the old ache of loneliness gnawing at him in ways he hadn't expected. Outside, the wind picked up. By midnight, the woman had fallen asleep, her breathing shallow but steadier than before. The child lay curled at her side, eyes still open, staring at the ceiling as though afraid to blink. Daniel sat by the table, the rifle resting near his hand. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't chance. Strangers didn't just collapse at your doorstep unless the world behind them had caught fire. And fire always spread. As the hours dragged, he thought he heard movement outside. The crunch of dirt, the shift of a shadow near the barn. He rose, lantern in hand, and stepped out onto the porch. But the yard lay empty. The fields stretched dark and silent. Only the moon cast its pale light, turning the land into a silver wasteland. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on him, watching from the tree line. When dawn finally crept across the horizon, he returned to the cabin. The woman stirred, trying to sit up. Her voice rasped when she finally spoke, the words heavy with an accent but clear enough. "You should not have helped me." Daniel froze. The girl clutched her mother's arm, eyes darting between them. The woman's gaze held his, filled with something more than gratitude. It was warning. Before Daniel could ask what she meant, the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the land. Not one horse. Many. He went to the window. Out there, riding fast from the south, came the sheriff and half a dozen deputies. Dust rose behind them like a storm. Daniel's stomach knotted. Sheriff Kincaid didn't ride out this far unless something serious had stirred in town. And judging by the woman's face, Daniel suspected he already knew exactly what it was. The girl's small hand found his sleeve, tugging it as if to anchor him. Daniel glanced down at her, then back at the riders closing in. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, trouble had already arrived at his gate. The sheriff's riders approached quickly, their horses moving with urgency, their expressions firm and serious, the kind of look people wore when they believed they were upholding the law. Daniel Harper stood on his porch, rifle held steadily, the weight of the night pressing against him. Inside, the woman and her daughter remained in silence, the tension thickening the air. Sheriff Kincaid slowed his horse to a trot as he reached the cabin, raising a gloved hand to signal the others to stop. Dust clung to his hat brim, and his eyes were sharp eyes that had seen many confrontations, eyes that left little room for negotiation. "Morning, Harper," Kincaid called out, his voice carrying but formal, lacking warmth. "I heard you may have had visitors last night." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He shifted his stance, feeling the boards of the porch creak beneath him. "I get coyotes or wandering travelers sometimes. You'll need to be more specific." The deputies tensed, their hands resting on their belts near their weapons. Kincaid leaned forward in the saddle, narrowing his gaze. "A woman, a visitor, took something not meant for her. It's a serious matter to have her under your roof, Daniel." Inside the cabin, the child whimpered faintly. Kincaid's expression softened just slightly. "There she is." Daniel didn't turn. He kept his rifle steady, his voice calm. "I've lived here many years, Sheriff. Learned one thing: not all trouble looks the way people describe it." Kincaid's expression hardened. "So you intend to resist, Harper? Because that's exactly what you're doing. That woman is required by the authorities. The sooner she is released, the sooner this can be resolved." Daniel's stomach tightened. He didn't know the full story, but he understood this. The way the woman had looked at him last night, the way she whispered, "You should not have helped me," was not guilt, it was a warning. Before he could respond, an unusual sound rolled across the plains, not thunder, not hoofbeats, not anything Daniel had heard before. It was low and resonant, like the ground itself was shifting. The deputies' horses grew restless, snorting, unsure of the ground beneath them. Dust rose into the air without wind. Then silence. The sheriff's horse pawed at the ground, unwilling to advance. The other animals mirrored its hesitation. Daniel noticed a flicker of uncertainty in Kincaid's eyes as he adjusted the reins. The horses refused to move. "What's happening?" one deputy muttered. The woman now stood in the doorway, her hair loose, her eyes alert despite visible fatigue. She remained silent, but the intensity of her gaze made the moment tense. The sheriff muttered under his breath. He dismounted, boots crunching on the ground. "You think something like this can stop me? You think I'm intimidated?" He adjusted his stance and reached for the cabin door. But the instant his hand touched the latch, something unusual occurred again. His knees buckled. His breath caught in his throat. He staggered back 2 steps, clutching at his chest like he'd been struck. One of the deputies jumped down to steady him, but Kincaid shoved him off, his face pale beneath the grime. He tried again, stepping toward the door, and again. The same invisible force stopped him cold, as though the threshold itself had become an iron wall. Daniel's knuckles whitened around his rifle. He didn't understand it, but he saw the truth plain enough. The sheriff could not enter. Kincaid's eyes darted from Daniel to the woman, then back. Fury replaced fear. "Fine," he hissed. "You want to harbor her? You want to defy the law? Then you've made yourself an enemy of this town, Harper, and don't think you can hide behind your fences forever." He yanked the reins, pulling his horse around. The deputies followed, though their faces betrayed unease. None of them looked back at the cabin. Dust rose again, and within minutes they were gone, swallowed by the horizon. Daniel stood frozen on the porch, the morning sun spilling across his face. Only when silence settled again did he lower the rifle. He turned to the woman. Her eyes hadn't left him. "You see now," she said softly. "They cannot touch me. Not yet. But they will not stop trying." Daniel's throat worked. "What in God's name are you carrying with you?" The woman lowered her gaze to the child, who clung tight to her skirts. "Not what?" she whispered. "Who?" Daniel felt the weight of her words like lead in his stomach. The child looked up at him, those wide, ancient eyes shimmering with something that didn't belong to any ordinary little girl. For the first time, Daniel understood that whatever had stumbled onto his ranch last night wasn't just a mother and daughter fleeing trouble. They were the storm itself. That night, the town burned with rumor. Folks claimed the sheriff had returned pale as death, cursing Harper's name, spitting tales of sorcery and curses. They said horses had bolted at the edge of town, refusing to cross. They said a shadow hung over Harper's land, a darkness that stretched even in daylight. And as the sun set again, Daniel Harper sat by his window watching the horizon, knowing full well the sheriff would be back, only this time he wouldn't be alone. The next day broke heavy, the sky choked with clouds that promised no rain but plenty of unrest. Daniel Harper had not slept. He'd sat at his kitchen table most of the night, oil lamp burning low, rifle laid across the boards. The woman and her daughter rested in the loft above, though their breathing was never quite steady. Even in dreams, they carried a weight Daniel couldn't begin to understand. By dawn, he heard the rumble again, not the unearthly groan of yesterday, but the more familiar thunder of hoofbeats. This time it wasn't half a dozen men, it was dozens. Daniel stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, heart pounding. Dust rose in a wide column on the horizon, shimmering like smoke. When it drew close enough, he saw them. Sheriff Kincaid at the front, and behind him what must have been 30 riders, rifles gleaming, faces hard. The town had emptied its men. Kincaid pulled up at the fence line, his horse stamping and tossing its head, still uneasy but forced into obedience by sheer will. He raised a hand, signaling the riders to spread. They fanned out in a rough semicircle, cutting Daniel's cabin off from every side. The message was clear: there would be no escape today. "Harper!" Kincaid bellowed. His voice carried over the prairie like a whip crack. "I gave you a chance. You chose wrong. Now you'll hand over the squaw and her brat, or I'll see your land burned and salted, and your bones picked clean by buzzards." Daniel gripped the rifle tight. His mouth was dry, but his voice held. "You tried stepping on my land yesterday, Sheriff. Didn't take, did it?" Laughter rippled through the riders, but there was no joy in it. Nervous, sharp laughter the kind men use when they're trying to cut through their own fear. Kincaid's face darkened. He drew his revolver, leveled it at Daniel. "This is your last warning." Behind Daniel, the door creaked open. He didn't have to turn to know it was her, the woman. She stepped onto the porch, the child clinging to her hand. Her eyes burned with something fierce and unrelenting, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of a curse. "You will not take us." A hush fell over the riders. Some shifted in their saddles, glancing to one another as though unsure whether they had signed up for this kind of fight. Kincaid sneered, trying to claw back authority. "You think you've got some spell protecting you? That's fear, not magic. And fear breaks easy once a bullet finds its mark." He cocked the revolver. The child stepped forward then, small and fragile, but her voice rang clear across the prairie. "You cannot cross. The land will not allow it." The men stirred uneasily. Horses shivered and stamped, ears pinning back. One bucked so hard its rider toppled, cursing as he hit the dirt. Another horse refused to move altogether, rearing and screaming until its rider let go. Daniel's stomach knotted. He wasn't a man of visions, but in that moment, he swore he saw something shimmer between the fence posts, a faint line, a ripple in the air like heat rising off stone. Whatever it was, it stretched across the boundary of his land, unseen by some, undeniable to others. Kincaid swore and raised his revolver higher. "Enough of this," he fired. The crack tore the morning, but the bullet never reached its mark. Mid-air, it twisted, the sound of it hissing like metal against stone, before it shattered into dust. Gasps rippled through the riders. One crossed himself. Another turned his horse around, spurring it back toward town. Kincaid's hand shook. Fury replaced his fear, and he fired again, and again, each shot twisting, falling apart, never finding the cabin, never touching the woman or her child. Sweat slicked his brow. His men watched him crumble, and with every failed shot, their loyalty bled out into the dirt. "You see," the woman said, her voice calm, almost sorrowful, "the land itself will not let you pass. You call yourself the law, but your law ends at his fence. Beyond it, there is only truth." Daniel turned, staring at her. "Who are you?" he whispered. Her gaze softened. She touched her daughter's hair, the child who now clung to her skirts like a shadow. "I am no one," she said quietly. "But she is the last of her people's line. They hunted us for what she carries inside her. Blood older than this town, older than this land's fences. The sheriff knows. That is why he fears her." The child looked up at Daniel, her eyes luminous, ancient, like pools that had seen centuries. And Daniel understood. She wasn't just a little girl, she was legacy. She was the kind of thing men like Kincaid could never control, no matter how many guns they carried. Kincaid's rage boiled over. "Kill them all!" he roared. But the order was a death knell. Half the men turned their horses and fled. The others hesitated, caught between fear and obedience, until the horses themselves made the choice for them, rearing, bucking, bolting in every direction. Within moments, the grand semicircle of riders collapsed into chaos. Kincaid alone remained, trembling with hate. He staggered toward the fence, revolver clutched tight. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think they'll let you walk free? No. They'll hunt you. They'll hunt you until—" He never finished. His body stiffened as he tried to step over the fence line. For a heartbeat he froze, eyes wide in horror, before he collapsed into the dust, the revolver slipping from his hand. He did not move again. The silence that followed was vast, broken only by the wind whispering across the prairie grass. Daniel lowered his rifle, hands trembling. He turned to the woman. She looked at him, not with triumph, but with sorrow. "It will not end here," she said, "but you have given us one more dawn. That is enough." Daniel swallowed hard. "Where will you go?" "Where the land allows us," she said simply. She touched his arm, a brief, fleeting gesture of gratitude. Then she and her daughter stepped down from the porch, crossing the yard. The fence parted for them like mist, and in moments they were gone, swallowed by the horizon just as swiftly as they had come. Daniel Harper stood alone on his porch, staring at the sheriff's still body lying broken at his fence line. He thought of the law, of fear, of the way men built towns on stolen land and called it civilization. He thought of the woman's words, "The land will not allow it." And for the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of something greater than himself, pressing down on him. Not law, not survival, something older, something that whispered in the grass, in the soil, in the endless silence of the prairie night. The story of Daniel Harper is more than just a tale of a rancher, a sheriff, and a woman who carried truths too heavy for this world. It's a reminder that power built on fear will always crumble, and that sometimes the strongest walls aren't built by men, but by the land itself. If this story gripped you, if it made you see the frontier in a darker, sharper light, then share it. Let it echo further than this cabin, further than this town. Because the more these forgotten tales are told, the more we remember. History isn't written only by the victors, but also by the voices they tried to silence.